My finger hovered over the send button. One click, that's all it took. Hitting enter on that message, telling my husband the truth about my affair, changed everything. Boom, my world imploded. You think you know how these stories go? Trust me, you don't. This isn't about getting caught or begging forgiveness. Think more along the lines of lies spiraling out of control, whispers behind my back, and a twist of fate that left me wishing I'd never started typing that damn message. Buckle up, because husband vanished from our city after I told him the truth is my story, and it's not for the faint of heart. The cursor blinked on the screen, mocking me. Just tell him, my traitorous brain kept whispering. Just get it over with. For 2 weeks, I've been writing and deleting, rewriting, and agonizing. How do you text someone that your marriage is a sham? That the guy you've been sneaking around with isn't some fling, but the reason you can't look at your own husband anymore? I typed the words, cold and brutal despite their simplicity. Then I jammed my thumb down on the send button before I could chicken out. Silence. Not the normal pause of a text conversation, but a thick, choking silence that made my ears ring. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, smash the damn thing against the wall. Instead, I shoved it in my pocket and stared at my reflection. It's over, I said aloud to the weary-looking woman in the mirror. He'll get the message, and that's that. My voice didn't even sound convincing to my own ears. The grocery store loomed ahead. I didn't want to go in, but the fridge was empty, a testament to weeks of takeout and ignored meal planning. The damn list in my hands suddenly weighed a ton. Milk, eggs, his favorite brand of coffee. I squeezed my eyes shut. Had I left it on the list on purpose? Some petty part of me hoped he'd notice, feel that little sting of betrayal. Inside, the bright fluorescent lights made my head pound. Every couple holding hands, every casual laugh felt like a personal attack. His coffee, dark and bitter on the shelf, practically screamed at me. I grabbed some random brand, tossed it in the cart, and fled to the checkout line. The rest of the day was a blur. His absence wasn't new, the affair had ensured that, but this was different. This emptiness was final, this was the space he'd leave, forever. The Google search results hit me like a ton of bricks. Betrayal trauma? Surviving infidelity? Am I a monster? Suddenly it was less about him, and more about what the hell was wrong with me. Every clinical term felt like a slap in the face. I slammed the laptop shut. Nope, not dealing with that today. Lisa came over that evening, bless her heart. She brought wine and that worried, eyebrows slightly raised expression I'd come to dread. I should have been grateful, but every sympathetic, "How are you doing?" just made me want to scream. Did she know? Did she suspect? I'm fine, I lied, topping off my glass. Better, actually, it's a relief, in a weird way. I didn't even try to make it sound convincing. Her pitying smile stung way worse than an accusation would have. The rest of the week was a blur of work, thankfully busy, and sleepless nights. Every song on the radio, whether it was sappy pop or screaming metal, was suddenly about heartbreak and betrayal. Had I been this clueless when we were happy, or had everything always been a lie? Worst of all was the smell. Not his cologne, though that haunted me too, but the lingering scent of him everywhere I turned. It had wafted off a passing stranger and sent me spiraling. I wanted to rip out my own nose, just to make it stop. One night, after too much wine and not enough food, I tackled the elephant in the room, our photo albums. Digital, of course. It felt safer, somehow, to delete a file than tear up an actual picture. Yet, each pixelated smile I banished into the recycle bin felt like a miniature murder. Hours blurred together while I clicked and clicked, flashes of happy memories stabbing with each deletion. Finally, exhausted and emotionally eviscerated, I collapsed on the bed. I didn't even have the energy to cry. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, shattering the dead silence of 3 a.m. for a hot, desperate second. I thought it was him. Some drunken confession, a plea for forgiveness. I snatched it up, just a spam text. I chucked the phone aside, but the jolt of adrenaline was enough to banish any hope of sleep. Our last fight played out in my head like a broken record. His shocked face, the way his voice cracked when he finally spoke, the awful words tumbling out of my mouth. The truth, ugly and undeniable. I was the villain, there was no way around it. The days that followed were torture. I became a pro at faking normalcy at work, plastering on a smile and making small talk. But each time my phone lit up, hope flared, only to be smothered by disappointment. Had he blocked me? Disappeared? Worse, was he already with someone new? The internet was no help. His social media, radio silence. A ghost town where our posed, happy life used to be. I obsessed over it, scrolling endlessly. I was part stalker, part masochist. And then, the phone call that made my blood run cold. His mother. Usually, our chats were polite and surface level, but her voice, there was a tremor to it, a hesitation I'd never noticed before. Have you heard from him lately, dear? I'm a bit worried, the unspoken question hung in the air. Did you finally drive him away for good? 1,000 lies raced through my head. It'd be so easy to blame his absence on work, some vague trip. But something made me blurt out the truth, stripped bare. He knows about everything. He hasn't contacted me. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally, a soft sob, and a whispered, "Oh, my dear," before she hung up. And then came the guilt. Real, gnawing guilt that was somehow worse than the shame. My hand instinctively reached for his spot on the couch before I remembered. Empty, cold, I shoved a throw pillow there, a flimsy barrier against the void. The TV blared in the background, some mindless sitcom I didn't even care about. Distraction, that was the goal. It wasn't working. The worst part was the questions. From well-meaning coworkers, shabby neighbors, the cashier at the damn grocery store. How's everything at home? They'd ask, innocent smiles on their faces. Every time, I had to relearn how to breathe, how to plaster on my "I'm fine" mask. A lie, every damn time. And then there was him. The lover. The reason for the mess I'd made. His text. One measly, "Are you okay?" hovered on my phone screen, a constant accusation. I wanted to type back, spill my guilt, beg for forgiveness. Or maybe scream in all caps, "You did this too." Instead, I blocked his number. Another small act of self-preservation, another piece of myself I barely recognized. The guilt twisted inside me, a constant hum beneath the numbness. But there it was, flickering in the darkest corner of my mind, relief. It felt monstrous to admit, but I couldn't deny it. No more pretending, no more dodging his questions, his silent judgment. A terrible freedom, laced with poison. One afternoon, sunlight streaming into the dusty living room felt unbearably bright. I couldn't stay locked up anymore, couldn't hide behind my carefully crafted lies. For the first time in weeks, I ventured out. Just to walk, aimless at first, but each step felt defiant. The city didn't magically look different. Yet, something had shifted. I was no longer a ghost haunting familiar streets, but a woman, exposed and vulnerable. The weight of secrets didn't vanish, but it mingled with a strange anticipation now. What next? That was the terrifying, exhilarating question. The morning I swore I'd actually make it into the office, his toothbrush fell out of the bathroom cabinet. It clattered on the tiles, a tiny plastic missile aimed right at my heart. I froze, staring at it, and then something inside me snapped. That goddamn toothbrush was not going to win. I shoved clothes into a backpack, ignored the gnawing worry that I was running away, not just going to work. The train felt like a lifeline, its mindless bustle comforting compared to my own swirling thoughts. Each station I passed felt like another mile between me and the wreckage of my life. But the office wasn't a sanctuary I'd hoped for. His name echoed in unfinished reports. I found myself staring at his empty chair, imagining him there, accusing. My usual efficiency crumbled. I buried myself in menial tasks, answering emails with clipped responses, just to keep busy, to keep my brain from catching up. Lunch was spent wandering aimlessly, pretending to be fascinated by overpriced salads and boutique shops I couldn't afford. The envy was back, twisting in my gut, as I watched couples strolling by. They had what I'd shattered, or did they? The thought was dangerous, seductive. By the time the workday ended, I was exhausted, but the idea of returning home was unbearable. I found myself in a dimly lit bar instead, the sharp tang of whiskey a welcome assault on my senses. Strangers clinked glasses around me, their laughter and conversations a comforting white noise to drown out my own thoughts. With each drink, the knot in my chest loosened a fraction. I wasn't fixed, not by a long shot. But neither was I paralyzed. I could keep moving, if only one shaky step at a time. That, for now, felt enough. The buzzer rang, its high-pitched whine slicing through my fragile morning. Not another, "How are you doing?" sympathy visit, please. I dragged myself to the door, expecting some takeout order I didn't remember making. It wasn't food. A small, brown box sat on the mat. His name, scrawled in that familiar handwriting I used to love, stared back at me. A return to sender notice mocked me from the corner. So even his belongings had given up on him. I kicked the damn thing under the couch, ignoring the satisfying thump. The rest of the day was spent avoiding the living room, that hidden accusation waiting to be dealt with. I tried to lose myself in spreadsheets, but the numbers blurred. His face kept flashing through my mind, angry, betrayed, just gone. That night, the nightmare found me again. He was yelling, but the words were muffled, indecipherable. I reached out, desperate to explain, but he vanished into swirling darkness. I woke gasping, sweat-soaked and trembling. Sleep, the oblivion I craved, had become another form of torture. My phone buzzed nonstop, messages piling up. Sarah, David, even old college friends I hadn't spoken to in years. Had the news somehow spread? Every text felt like a noose tightening around my throat. I shoved the phone into a drawer, unable to confront their worried inquiries, let alone the mess of half-truths I'd have to spin. The package under the couch taunted me. It had to be dealt with. Opening it felt like breaking a taboo. Inside, a book he'd ordered, a new hiking backpack, random stuff that spoke of a life now abandoned. Trash or donate, it hardly mattered. The ache in my chest had nothing to do with these forgotten objects. I slumped on the couch, defeated. The space beside me felt vast, an emptiness that mocked my fleeting sense of escape. I was hunted, not only by my guilt, but by the relentless exposure of it. His disappearance wasn't the end, only a terrible, drawn-out beginning. The book I picked up felt wrong. It had been on the bedside table for weeks, one of his choices, and now the sight of it made my stomach clench. But something stubborn in me refused to give up. I forced myself to read a page, then another, willing myself back into some semblance of routine. It was just a book, not a booby trap. Days bled into one another, a blur of work, numb half-attempts at normalcy, and nights haunted by his absence. I'd wander the apartment barefoot in the evenings, the echoing silence amplifying every creak and groan into a potential threat. Was that his footstep? My overactive imagination was painting a fresh kind of hell. One morning, I walked past the corner coffee shop I used to frequent with him. A couple laughed at a table by the window, their ease a mockery of my shredded nerves. I caught the barista's eye, and swore I saw pity flicker across her face before she looked away. Had the whole city turned into one giant jury, judging my every move? The whispered rumors started subtly, not direct accusations, but raised eyebrows, a sudden silence when I entered a room. People I barely knew offering unsolicited advice on getting through difficult times. I wanted to scream that this wasn't some generic heartbreak. I'd caused this disaster, and every sideways glance seemed to confirm it. Then came the voicemail. His mother again, her voice strained and brittle. I just saw him. In the supermarket. He looked. Well, I thought you should know. The floor tilted beneath my feet. He was here, in the city, like a lurking ghost. And now everyone would know I'd lied. I spent the rest of the day in a numb haze, imagining the confrontations. Him, eyes blazing, cornering me in a grocery aisle. His mother's tears of sorrow and relief that he was alive, if not well. Or worst of all, silence. Him refusing to acknowledge me, erasing me from his existence just as thoroughly as I'd erased his from mine. The text bubble stared at me, empty and mocking. It was almost a relief, those few frantic taps of the delete key, erasing the confession before it could ruin me even more. The truth, choked down, festered inside me instead. Sleep had become the true enemy. The bed, with its expanse of cool sheets and echoing space, was unbearable. I started sleeping on the couch, curled up tight in a pathetic imitation of safety. Each time I woke, heart pounding, I checked my phone with a desperate hope I knew was ridiculous. Still nothing. Workdays were a blur of forced conversations and meticulously masked anxiety. But the nights, those belonged to my unraveling. His toothbrush, that stupid plastic thing, still glared at me from the bathroom cup. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, yet the sight of it made me sick. It became a kind of twisted ritual, proof that this hell was real, not just some fever dream. I found myself obsessively checking his mother's social media. Vacuous posts about her knitting circle, photos of her cat, nothing. But I clung to it, scouring every mundane image for some clue, a hidden message only I could decipher. The silence was the worst. It screamed at me from every corner of the apartment. And it wasn't just his silence anymore. Lisa hadn't texted in days. My colleagues' pitying glances had morphed into outright avoidance. He was winning, erasing me from his world, and mine was crumbling around me as a result. One afternoon, I cracked. The bar had become my guilty haven. In the dim light, with the burn of cheap whiskey, the edges of my panic softened. That day, I didn't just have one. Or two. I lost count, lost track of time, the bartender's concerned frown just one more blurry detail. Stumbling home was difficult. But in that hazy, alcohol-soaked state, a reckless plan began to form. It was stupid, desperate, possibly insane. But as I passed out on the sofa, a twisted flicker of defiance sparked in me. I wasn't going down without a fight. My head pounded like a war drum when I woke. A half-empty bottle of whiskey on the floor was a mocking testament to my meltdown. But beneath the hangover haze, a reckless determination fueled me. Time for lies was over. I wasn't going to hide anymore. The ring came off first. It felt heavier than I remembered, leaving a pale, accusing band on my finger. I shoved it into a drawer, a tiny act of rebellion that brought no relief. Next came the bigger lies. Ones that wouldn't just disappear with dodged questions or ignored texts. Emails were harder to fake, official communications left a trail. I sat at my laptop, fingers trembling, and crafted my masterpiece. An overseas job offer he couldn't refuse, a sudden departure, just vague enough to be believable, especially with my forced cheeriness. I hit send, and stared at the screen. It was done. And then, the craving hit. Not for more booze, but for him. The ghost I'd conjured. I had to go back to that place, the little bistro where we'd first met. Was it pathetic? Of course. But I clung to the twisted comfort of reliving what was lost. The bistro was unchanged. Cozy booths. The smell of freshly baked bread, couples whispering sweet nothings across their tables. Every detail was a fresh wound. I didn't order wine, like we used to. Just coffee, black and bitter, to match my mood. As I left, I knew I'd made a colossal mistake. Instead of closure, I felt even more exposed, the lies I'd woven a noose around my neck. Yet, there was a perverse thrill, too. It was out there now, this fake happy ending I created. The consequences would come, I knew that. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't just reacting. I was acting, no matter how destructive it might be. The rest of the day was spent in a state of jittery anticipation. Would his mother call, breathless with relief? Would concerned colleagues email? Would he appear at my door, somehow having seen through my pathetic charade? Nothing. But the waiting, the not knowing, was its own special brand of torture. The apartment felt like a prison. Each echoing silence was a countdown to disaster. It came in the form of a phone call, my heart thundering as I saw his mother's name flash on the screen. Here it was, the unraveling I'd so foolishly set in motion. "He's back," she choked out, a sob catching in her voice. "I saw him, in town. He looked terrible, but he's alive." Her voice shifted, confusion lacing through the relief. "Your email? About the job, didn't he tell you?" It took me a few awful seconds to process what she was saying. The overseas job was real? My manufactured lie had somehow become the truth. But how? Terror twisted in my gut. I stammered out some excuses, vague promises to talk to him, to clear up the misunderstanding. None of it made any sense, even to me. Hanging up, I stared into space. The room seemed to spin. My grand scheme had blown up in my face, leaving me more exposed, more vulnerable than ever. News spread quickly. Lisa's hesitant text arrived next, a mix of cautious concern and thinly veiled suspicion. "Heard he's back? Want to talk? You know I'm here." Colleagues, distant relatives, I felt them all zeroing in with morbid curiosity, the buzzard circling a dying animal. I shut my phone off. Cowardly, but self-preservation kicked in. I couldn't face the questions, the accusations, the whispers turning into shouts. Instead, I drifted. I cleaned. A frenzy of scrubbing and sorting, desperate action to combat the chaos in my head. But even the spotless counters couldn't erase the sense of impending doom. And then, the worst of it. Walking home from the grocery store, I saw him. Not a blurry figure on a corner, but him, real and undeniable, right in front of me. He looked thinner, shadows under his eyes, but I'd know that face anywhere. He stared back at me, shock turning to cold fury. I opened my mouth, but no words came. There were no excuses, no explanations that could fix this. Then, he simply turned and walked away, erasing me from his world as I watched, helpless and heartbroken. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tears and trembling. I'd craved certainty, and now I had it, cold and terrible. He was back, and he wanted nothing to do with me.